battle time is feeding time. I eat my enemies.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Total War Warhammer as a trilogy has done a great job of bringing Warhammer Fantasy Battle to life. There's never been a game that's explored and depicted this much of the world, and I'm not sure we're ever going to see another strategy game with this much content, locations, factions, and characters. With that said, there are elements that haven't been translated particularly well from the source material, some head-scratchers that leave you wondering if the developers even did a cursory Google search before diving in. And nowhere in Mortal Empires is that more pronounced than in the creation of Throgg, King of Trolls. Some of you have likely heard of the disconnect between the character from the army books, novels, and lore side of Warhammer and what was actually portrayed in the Norska DLC for Total War, but many of you have not. And regardless of whether you've been a part of these discussions before, I wanted to dive a bit deeper into the topic to shed a bit more light on it, explain why it's a problem, and hopefully bring more awareness to it so that it doesn't happen ever again in future Total War games, whether they be historical, fantasy, or science fiction. Just in the combined campaign for Warhammer 3, there are some complex characters coming in the future, like Neferata, for which writing and dialogue will be quite important in establishing the lore and making them interesting and engaging to play. So let me start off by saying I am not here to pretend that Warhammer is awash with incredibly well-written and interesting characters. It is not. A lot of them, perhaps even a vast majority, are purely action figures, caricatures, with all the depth of a kiddie pool, lacking nuance, depth, or any form of complexity whatsoever. They exist solely to sell overpriced bits of plastic, nothing more. It's pulpy, it's cheesy, it's ridiculous, and filled to the brim with cardboard cutouts, Gary Stews and Mary Sues with essentially zero development whatsoever. But of course, the Black Library is quite extensive, and for every useless, boring, and one-note character, there is another written by a talented author who clearly wants to give us something more, something relatable, or at least interesting. And there are some truly great villains in the Warhammer universe who aren't just cackling maniacs. They have human needs and desires. They have moments of weakness and levity, moments where you as the reader can understand why they chose a particular course of action, even if it's something you wouldn't do yourself. In my opinion, I feel like Chaos characters typically don't fit this bill. They tend to be pretty one-note and cartoony, except for the biopics where you're reading the story from their perspective, like the Egram von Horstmann novel. And then there's more opportunity to flesh them out and get to know them better. One thing that absolutely rings true in Warhammer Fantasy and 40k is that characters are a product of circumstance and their environment. And when your physical surroundings can quite literally corrupt you, that can lead to some huge changes in the story arc of your life. One fateful moment can lead to vast changes in one's outlook and cataclysmic shifts in the balance of power on the world stage. It's how many Chaos champions end up becoming these forces of nature. Diedrich Kastner is a perfect example of this, when he left the light of Sigmar and turned to the ruinous powers. If Sigmar had answered his prayers, if any god of order had revealed themselves or given him a sign, it's quite possible he never becomes Archaon the Everchosen. But he chose to become a slave of destiny, and then spent the next several lifetimes simultaneously fulfilling and rebelling against that prophecy. Which then brings us to Throgg. Now, everybody knows that trolls are really stupid. They look stupid, they are stupid. They're foul, mouth-breathing monsters with barely a thought to rub together. So naturally, in a series where lords are often just a blown-up, stronger version of whatever their base form is, it would be logical to conclude that Throgg is just a freakish beast that likes to eat his enemies, as he is oh so fond of telling us.
I eat my enemies.
What makes Throgg so interesting is that he retains that same bestial nature, the barbarism and carnivorous instincts of a monstrous troll, with the keen mind of a general and philosopher, one that has greater designs for his people, that isn't content to just live in an icy, blasted wasteland eating scraps for eternity. He wants to pass on knowledge and create a new race that has the capacity to think and reason and give his people a quote-unquote better life. That juxtaposition between pure predator and architect of the future of an entire species is at the core of who he is. Without it, it's no longer Throgg. He's just a pale imitation. So when you Google the Troll King's name and go to the Warhammer Wiki, the very first thing you see is an excerpt that says, Throgg is amongst the most unnaturally intelligent of his vile kind, intent on bringing the world under the rule of a new ice age with himself at its head. And to further drive that point home, there are two common quotes that people use to explain his outlook on the world. But we're going to add a bit of context here around those, because I think it makes it a bit more clear what he means in those conversations. Both of these are from the novel Kinslayer, which is one of the final Gotrek and Felix novels. The fervid, jealously intelligent visage of a troll leered between the bars of Max's cage. Crystalline shards of warpstone grew from his brow, running down his neck and shoulders like a mane of hair, and following the contours of his arms to produce a pair of harshly glowing club-like tumors around each wrist. Upon that gnarled, mineral-encrusted head, above eyes that shone with a god-given intellect, sat a crown engraved with the 8-pointed star of chaos. The silver circlet of Duke Enric had been forced over one wrist like a Kurgan trophy ring and sealed into place by the creep of that living mineral. It was not a face ever intended to speak. His name was Throgg, favorite of Chaos, the Troll King of Prague. What the gods gifted to me can be gifted unto another. I will not be the one mind in a race of blunt, witless animals. Throgg closed his hard gray fists around the bars until they groaned. For all his intellect and strength, the Troll King was bitterly alone. I believe in you, Max. I hope it will be you that does not fail. That, of course, is a conversation between Throgg and Maximilian Schreiber, a talented and banished mage of the Gold Order, and a rival compatriot of one Felix Jaeger. Throgg has kidnapped him, essentially, and used him, alongside many other mages, to bind the winds of magic and create a unified consciousness of sorts within a stone troll. A rather complex plan to ensure that he is no longer the only sharp mind in a race of dumb animals. And as we talked about with Archaon earlier, the corrupting, warping nature of chaos, and perhaps even the very action of picking up the Wintertooth crown and affixing it to his tusk, changed his life in such a drastic way that he is now looking to permanently change the fates of his entire race and create a new dominant life form. The other quote people often cite on this topic is this one from a little bit later in the novel. The Troll King drew back from the bars, seating the floor. He wrapped himself in a tattered red cloak, concealing the many mouths that silently opened and closed from his mutant torso. His head withdrew into the crystalline mane of warpstone that bulged from his shoulders. Ulrika licked thin blood over her dried lips. The war goes poorly for the Empire. Of course it does, Throgg cut in, his deep voice overpowering hers. You ask soft flesh to stand before the tide of chaos. Ulrika bit her tongue, trying to ignore Throgg's goading and concentrate on the message that Vlad had risked her life to deliver. It was getting harder to think, harder just to speak without a snarl. The beast was out. It basked under the glow of the Chaos Moon, and it hungered. My master implores you to move against Archaon's forces before it is too late. You have strength enough. Strength? Throgg growled, raising his hands and looking down at them. He clenched them into fists. Yes, I have strength. Is that all you see here, vampire? Strength? Am I a dumb hammer waiting to guide the arm of Sylvania? What was the brute talking about? Ulrika tried to think, but her talents lay with swords rather than words. It is the hubris of men to see their own destiny in all things. Von Karstein, the ever-chosen, dead men, exalted men. In their skin they are still men. This, Throgg's eyes shone, as he reached out to clasp the bars of Ulrika's cage. The iron groaned under his tightened grip. Will be the age of the beast. Pretty cool, right? This will be the age of the beast. And yet, when we contrast that with the voice lines in Total War, we are given a very different picture.
Ah! Biggie man over there has my crown! Stunty runt dare steal from me! Doesn't the stupid little man know he steals from royalty? When I catch him, I'm taking my crown back, and he'll be the first royal meal for the new king of the world! Me! Monsters and madmen all! Let's have their guts for lunch! My twisted army! You all follow that Troll King! And you know that where the Troll King goes, death follows! The serpent sluts over there challenge me because their master is scared. Scared of me! No magic will save them. I'll hammer their champion into a bloody meat patty before I eat him!
I eat my enemies. What's your problem? Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. And of course, voice acting that makes him sound like a complete dumbass. Total fascination with snacking on flesh. None of the keen intellect from the novels comes across in any meaningful way. And you might be thinking to yourself at this point, okay, Creative Assembly obviously didn't do their homework. They took one look at him, sized him up, and went off his looks rather than his lore. But the weirdest thing in this translation is that CA clearly knows to an extent that he's meant to be smart. There's little hints of it dropped all throughout the game, like in the diplomacy screen, where his quotes say some pretty interesting and deep stuff. But the actual voiceover gives you the most generic dumbass replies.
I will eat you! What's your problem? Can't, won't.
He says, put it on ice, and what's your problem? But the text on screen says, no, there is no bargain, no barter without your souls as surety, and get from these frozen lands before the slaughter brutes catch your fetid scent, which are probably not words that a stupid troll would use or understand, surety and fetid. But unfortunately, that's really the only glimpse we get of his intelligence in the entire freaking game. So why is this mischaracterization such a problem? Well, it's like making Samwise Gamgee a nihilistic asshole who despises hobbits and doesn't really care much if Saruman succeeds in the scouring of the Shire. It takes all the elements that makes him special and unique and utterly ignores them. So you're left with a generic, stupid troll that just happens to be a bit bigger and stronger than the others. Completely misses the point of his character arc. And you might say, well, it's not a big deal. Throgg's one of 80 lords by the time this is all said and done. He's not a major character, who cares? And you'd be right to an extent, he is not a major character in Warhammer lore. But no, Throgg was one of only 2 lords that launched with Norska, a DLC faction that had many months of work dedicated to it. He was one of only 2 characters there, 2 legendary lords that absolutely needed to be done justice, that weren't just blank, generic templates. They created Wulfric in a way that reflected his source material just fine. They got his themes correct, as banal as they are. No reason it couldn't also happen for the King of Trolls. You can't even really argue it's a budgetary concern because it doesn't cost more money for a voice actor to say something that sounds moderately intelligent. He's gonna say the same amount of words regardless. Just have him say smart things instead of dumb things. And in so doing, you will more accurately reflect the character and themes Throgg should be conveying.
My ice age comes. Battle time is feeding time. King on trolls. Winter tooth. I eat my enemies.
So how did they screw it up? Is it because they felt like people were too stupid to understand a big brute having a keen, sharpened mind? Did CA feel like seeing a dumb-looking monster speaking intelligently would unnerve people? Or that it would be a strange fit for the model they created? Because I'd argue that's the point. It is supposed to be unnerving and otherworldly and chaotic to look into the eyes of an animal and have it stare back with malice and understanding. To know that its brain is more capable and more dangerous than yours, even before we get to the crushing mass, rock-hard muscle, and 15-foot-tall slab of bone-crunching carnage. Throgg is a big dude. He's a scary dude. He can melt your bones and flesh with copious amounts of vomit, and yet he can philosophize better than most human beings. I feel it was a major missed opportunity on what was otherwise a very solid piece of content in Norska, and it's something I seriously hope we avoid as we move into more of the Chaos characters in Game 3, because while some of them are undeniably cookie-cutter silliness and not particularly interesting characters, we have the twisted honor and chivalry of Valkia the Gore Queen, and the cunning and charm of Neferata, and those are important elements to nail when creating their voice lines and characters and background lore for Total War Warhammer 3. And nobody wants to see their favorite characters get butchered. Waited a long time in many of these cases to see them on quote-unquote the big screen, and we only get one shot at this stuff. I seriously doubt Throgg will ever be updated in that manner. So it's not cool when lords aren't really done justice, because they're probably not going to be changed in any meaningful way going forward. Their gameplay elements, sure, not their voice acting, not their writing. Those are parts you need to nail if you want to accurately represent the character, which we know CA does. There's really no excuse to entirely miss out on what makes these legendary characters special. So let me know, are there any other models or elements of the writing and backstory of Mortal Empires that you feel entirely miss the mark, that just don't really share anything with how they're supposed to be implemented? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Indie Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.